Coach Abel here with Coach Weiss, the Able Body Experts, and we're going to throw a little more scientific stuff at you. We have to sometimes explain our principles, Coach, so sometimes there's no way around getting a little bit scientific, so we're going to do that right now. You can find out more about this in terms of any article I've written about innervation training and why and how, the ins and outs of the principles involved. One of these is what we call T.A.P, or total activation potential. And this is a neurologically based phenomenon, or a neurologically based principle. Basically, you're looking at increased rates of force production, rotation of motor units. You can think of motor units, rotation of motor units, Coach, like lines of soldiers going into battle in the old days. And that only occurs from motor units that are of a similar threshold. So that becomes really important when you're in a strength world or trying to get more muscular development. So increased rates of force production, rotation of motor units, recruitment of muscle fibers, increased firing frequency. Sometimes gains in strength aren't exactly from increased force production, but actually increased firing frequency. People don't understand that at all. And what we call synchronization of motor units, getting motor units to fire at the same time to contribute to the work value. So, and another thing called PMS, which is a pre-movement silence period, a refractory state of muscles before they go into action. Now that's a lot of complicated mumbo jumbo. All you have to remember is TAP, total activation potential. And the reason it's important is because these are qualitative aspects of strength that are under neural control or neurological control. No one talks about this in our sport, Coach. They always have this fundamental blindness of strength being a musculoskeletal bias or concern, which is not. It's actually a dependent variable. It depends on things in the nervous system that you can't measure. You can't measure this. You can only observe it in terms of a more mature athletic prowess being witnessed. So, over time, these come only from volume of training. This is why it's another myth of this low volume HIT, one set once every 2 weeks or whatever it is nonsense. Because these neurological adaptations take place over time and over volume. So they become very important. And you can see my Circle of Intensity article in the Abel approach that explains the qualitative adaptations to intensity over strength in much, much more detail. So understanding total activation potential means understanding how low volume training won't work for most trainees and why, which is because it's not a measurable thing. It's not about lifting more. It's about adaptive response that takes place mostly in the neural. It's a neural event, not a muscular one. Any comments, Coach?
Yeah, and that's the easiest example I can give of that is of just taking somebody that's a complete newbie and hasn't trained before and lay them down on a bench and they do a bench press and then they just go like this with 25 pounds, right?
Right.
2 weeks later they're using 50 pounds. Well, that isn't a muscular response. That's a completely neural response, and that eventually leads to greater muscle gains. But essentially, right at the very beginning period, and as you adapt and as you get better at what you're doing, and as you add muscle, you're essentially learning how to fire the muscles more efficiently. Is what's happening. So,
total activation potential is what you're describing,
yeah,
which is witnessed. And now another thing you're kind of hinting at is what we get into now is a misinterpretation of what people are seeing by the traditionalists, the people who are all into, you know, ego training, lift more, lift more. They're misinterpreting what is actually going on as being a muscular event when it's a neural one. So I'm going to give you a quote here from one of the best researchers, and the quote isn't basic, this is an exact quote. Performance, athletic or for development, is determined by the ability of the nervous system to activate muscles appropriately. And this is from Comey's book, circa somewhere in the 1970s. So, and this has to do with the relationship between inhibitory and excitatory responses of muscles in action. So Golgi tendon reflexes, things like that, Coach, they want to shut down work because they sense danger. They sense extreme ranges of motion or load.
Protecting the body, that's a protective mechanism.
And you have to coax these inhibitory responses from allowing the body to work harder. Again, this is an adaptive response that takes place over time. That's why you end up lifting more weight when you go from beginner to intermediate. So it's not about how much is on the bar. So again, innervation training, the muscles work the weights don't work the muscles. Final thought, Coach?
Yeah, just think of it as the nervous system is kind of what puts the brakes on the muscles. And as you train it to...
Or the gas.
Yeah, so that's the thing, is it once you train it to realize, okay, I can handle this, then it takes the brakes off and allows you to lift more weights. And without that adaptive response, that just doesn't happen.
And that's a learned response over time. So this has nothing to do with how much is on the bar, which can actually detract if you're creating more inhibitory responses. So this is TAP, Total Activation Potential Principle, explained. Hopefully some of you will get it, some of you won't. If you want a more understanding of that, check out my Circle of Intensity chapter in the Abel approach. And this has been an important